No, you do not need a headset in order to use MRTK. In fact, we have several options for you to choose from without a device. So first, when you're building and testing your app, there are two options you can use. The first one is the input simulation feature, and this allows you to test using built-in mouse and keyboard inputs inside the Unity editor. In addition, you can also use the HoloLens emulator, which allows you to test on the PC without having an actual physical HoloLens. And when you want to actually deploy your app, you still don't need a headset for that. In addition to deploying on the popular XR devices, you can also deploy your MRTK app to mobile devices using ARKit and ARCore. And in addition, you can deploy your MRTK app as a 2D app to desktop or to web using WebGL.
Ah, okay. Always a good sign.
Thank you so much for being here today. I wonder if you can see me, because here on the for some reason I cannot see the camera.
I can't see you, no.
Okay, let me see quickly how we can make sure that it's working. One second. I believe it's working now. Can you see me?
Yep, I can see you.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. Okay, so we're super, super excited to be here today. Thank you so much, everybody. Your presence is absolutely appreciated. Um, Today, we're going to be speaking with Simon Jackson, and he's going to be doing an amazing presentation about accelerating your Unity XR project with the service framework. This sounds super exciting. I can't wait myself to learn about your presentation. Thank you so much, Simon. I'm going to be adding your presentation here right away. And I believe that's it. The stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you much, Dana. Back with good friends and family and everyone who's in the show. So, welcome aboard. We're going to go through a nice little project which we've been working on for many years now, and it's sort of bursting out onto its own and sort of making it so that all Unity developers now, not just those with X-Reality, but also X-Reality likes the performance, and to make the best of their projects. So as we sort of get started, oh, my clicker's not working. Aha. Who am I? So I'm Simon Darkside Jackson, for those who don't know. I've been around a while. Yes, I'm old. In my time, I've worked with many organizations, many places, in various technology gaps and things like that. And for those kind of things, I have a few awards from Microsoft. Been a long time Microsoft MVP since back in the XNA game development days in Windows Phone, and now sort of sitting in the mixed reality camp, and also one of the few game development sort of MVPs in that realm, which also then gave me the recognition from the Xbox group, where I'm one of a handful of the developer MVPs within the Xbox MVP program. We mainly focus on experience, but a group has always do all the job of making sure that all the development plans and all the developers are up to speed on what they're doing. And it's through the joint ventures of those two that a new program started up. You have to excuse the logo because the logo is still being worked on. It was originally Game Stack for those who saw it, but now it's a Microsoft Game Dev Ambassador stroke MVP, where we're focusing on all the big back-end solutions provided through Azure, whether it's PlayFab, whether it's Simply Gone, working with Unreal, working with Unity to help people get accelerated in the Xbox brand. And when we say the brand, we mean both console, Windows, mobile, cloud, anywhere that Microsoft has got a gaming presence, really, to try and push those things forward. I've also wrote a few books to my for been a while now, although I am thinking about doing a new version of the 2D Unity one now, just to bring it up to speed and get some of the more exciting things that people keep asking for. I also run a open source project called the Unity UI Extensions, and that's about making sure you're bringing tools and services to all Unity developers when they're working with Unity UI. The book is out, whether I'll update it to the UI build, because yes. And I'm also my master in chief of my own game studio, Zenith Moon Studios, as well as doing lots of consultancy and other work. So I've been around a bit. In the history of things, I was brought on to the original Holo Developer Toolkit. And then after a while, I went ahead and then proposed and then started building with a lot of great colleagues the Microsoft Mixed Reality Toolkit version 2, which worked instead of just being on HoloLens, it was about bringing support to all different platforms. That sort of then evolved then and separated to become the XRTK, and a few other offshoots and forks that are now thriving on that to bring more mixed reality solutions to Unity frameworks and having it a more compact and organized fashion. But behind all these, as not a lot of people know, is that there was this framework which ran all the services. It got tons of performance out of Unity and helped run all of these different toolkits themselves. And as we moved into the realm of the new group now, which is the Reality Collective, we sought to try and break things up to provide more useful features that people can make use of. So when we look at Unity today and we're trying to build solutions, especially when we're trying to build reusable solutions and trying to bring things together, it's not that easy. especially when you're dealing with functionality. If you want back-end code that does like spawning or kind of some kind of management, it can be hard for devs to try and find their code. Code realistically should only exist for like other UX things, so game objects that actually do things in the scene, or UX or menus and things that are there. If you've got other code in there, it kind of creates problems, mainly because the state of those game objects, it's not guaranteed. Unity will reload at occasion. We've all been there when Unity one day wakes up and it decided to reserialize all your settings that are in a scene. They have to go back and try and find and see what went on. And especially if you're dealing with multiple scenes, it creates more issues. One other little known fact is that having scripts on empty game objects in your scene, they still have a performance hit, because Unity still has to evaluate these, check what they're doing, issue the messages that are going to them. So even if there's no code running, there's still a lot of work going on that slows down Unity overall. I mean, Unity themselves, through DOTS and through ECS, are looking at other ways to do this, to take code out of the scene for when it's not being used. But a lot of people seem to think that's a big pill to digest when it's going through, because it's a whole dramatic change how you're doing. And all things get compounded when you work across multiple scenes. Yes, we can enable things for don't destroy and load, but again, that's the issue with the fact that state might not be preserved. Trying to find or access code, you end up having to use very bad performing or expensive functions to then find the things you need to be able to run if they're not running properly, or to call to them. A lot of people also use like static functions and such like that, but those themselves inherently have their own problems. So part of the fundamental go way back when of how we solved a lot of these problems is we built this framework. It's based upon dependency injection and a few of the good patterns at the time of how you build, performed, and actualized code. And one of the things that we found there is that there is a huge speed boost by doing this. If you don't have everything as a mono behavior, you gain all those cycles where Unity is not having to check up on your scripts. They're there, they're accessible, they need to be able to run all the time with no overhead. And as much as the code you need to be able to do it there. You need reliability, so that you know that code you write is going to be accessible all the time. It's accessible all quickly, and you can guarantee that once you've created it and put it there and it's running, it's always going to be there. Nothing's going to sort of get in the way of that. Going over the whole framework things, the biggest thing we saw was that there's about an 80% speed increase from just moving to a service-oriented architecture over game objects and utilities and things like that. And that's just how much you save by having all your back-end service code. We're not saying everything, because things that are in UX, things that are like a player in the scene who's doing things, they need code on them to run. But for everything else that you have in your project, whether you're talking to back-end services, where you're talking to leaderboards or high score routines, or a lot of even back-end processing AI routines, you don't need to drain the scene of energy when it's actually doing these things. Obviously, this is even more critical these days as we look for low-power mobile or VR solutions. You also need a good way of accessing code. A game object find is a horrible function to use, especially in your project. We work around the ways of trying to limit our use of this. We'll only do it in start or awake and make these things only work the way we need to do. But you'd end up using different patterns and different things for accessing different code depending on where it is. And that's provided your developers even know where it is. But ultimately, it's a case of when we build these things, we end up using these things in multiple projects. So we want to be able to package them up and literally lift and shift and put it into the next project and have it just work. No messing with scenes, no working on tweaking settings and things like that. We just want things to work. So what the service framework gives us effectively is there is a single instance, a single game object in the scene, which the service manager uses to base on, and the only thing it uses this for is to get access to all the Unity events. Just one tick, one call, and it's got access to everything that's there. Ideally, we have this running in the very first scene, or even as a pre-scene when we're actually loading the scene, or loading the project even, and having it manage as much as possible. taking all that code out of your scene, all the projects, and simply having it run in the back end. It's designed to be a highly configurable framework. There's been lots of pluses and minuses about how the configuration works in the MRTK or the XRTK. But ultimately, it's a case of building small digestible pieces to say, this piece of functionality, this is its startup settings, or these are the prefabs that I need the service to know about when it gets started, or these are the hooks and the events that I need this to work. But being able to do that ahead of time, before design, and having it run autonomously no matter which scene it's picked out of. One of the other big issues we see with code is the fact that it needs to be platform aware. It's not always easy or sometimes to have a lot of if-def compiler definitions around our code. We just want to say, right, this code, just run it on Android or just run it on this system over here. Everything will compile, but I don't want it to be accessible because in a mobile platform, I want to use the Google services. On the desktop, I want to use the Steam services. And having the code itself know when it's going to need to be run is very useful. And one of the things that we've worked very hard with is to ensure that everything is 100% tested. So we've got 100% code coverage testing, including a lot of scenario-based testing of how these things run in an environment. But enough theory, enough talk. What do we mean by the service framework itself? So ultimately, the service framework is interface driven. This means that, for those who are not aware, you're given a contract for how you're going to interoperate with a piece of functionality. What the properties that are going to be accessible, are they going to be read-only, and what functions are going to be going in and out, and any events that are driven off them. You're given in the case of you're given a contract to all of our code that this is how something will run, and it will always be accessible in that sense. And when you write other implementations based upon the same interface, they have to comply, which means your code will always run. We also have the facility to the fact that not just core services, because fine, I've got like a leaderboard service and that's how it works. But as I said, if I want different leaderboards and different platforms, or in some cases, even having multiple leaderboards all managed in a central place, we also have the ability to have extensions, which we call modules. They can essentially attach onto your service, so they become sub-service singular components that run onto the main component. This becomes extremely valuable when you're working with a different platform. So I have one way to talk about a leaderboard. I don't need to care or worry about which platform is currently running at this time, because it will 100% work, because it will use the service that's there. I don't need to have different code for different platforms and different things cluttering up my project. Have that sequenced away, safe in an organized fashion. It also has an element of maintainability about that as well. And behind that all, again, and this is optional, you can then drive also configuration around these services or even the modules themselves. Having different settings which will control how that service starts up and allow you to have more design-driven configuration or behavior of your service, rather than having to have magic numbers or hard-coded values that you have to go and search to find a script. It's a case of go look at the service, change this configuration, and off it goes. And we'll show some of that shortly. So we want to create a service. Now, obviously, a lot of things are very complex, but we can break this down into a simple example. So there's not going to be anything really fantastic here. We're going to create one interface for a settings service. So all this settings service is going to do, it's going to keep control of what's the maximum number of players that my project's going to run at any one time. And it's also going to have a single function, which is just going to save my settings at time. This is for the process of the actual talk. We're keeping things nice and clean and simple. We're going to create a profile with one value, so we can change at design time what the maximum number of players we have running. And we're also going to implement the actual service itself, just then making it so that it can manage those max player settings and also provide that function. And then we'll sort of use it in the project, because we might as well use it since we built this thing. So if I switch over to Unity, he says making a mess of the presentation. There we go. Where's Unity? Good old Unity. Now, I have made a start of a 10 just for the sake of time, and I've created a simple project. There's nothing really in it. I'll create a nice little screen to show here's my player count, a nice button that adds players. a nice little warning that says when you've reached your maximum players is going to show up, and then a quit button just for the sake of it. But we want to get us started nicely building our service. Now, first thing we need to be able to do is this should have worked a lot better there. Okay, so no. I love it when things go live and go so well. Where it is, there it is. Okay, so we start up off at the home. So the Reality Collective has got a whole lot of documentation and services around this. But effectively, we go to the service framework.realitycollective.io. We'll have our nice welcome page, and we click on Get Started. It's all the information you need to get going. The only thing we need to know here first is the fact that all the Reality Collective packages are all sourced on OpenUPM. This makes them highly reliable. Also, there's version control in there of how we get access to these services themselves. The simplest way to get started is to use the OpenUPM CLI client. Although, to be fair, some people don't always like this because it requires you to go to OpenUPM and then set up Node and Node.js and on your machine. You may or may want to do that. If you don't want to do that, the simple answer then is to actually just go into your project and then set up for UPM to be able to connect to the sources. If you do use OpenUPN, it's a case of you run the command and it adds it to your project for you quickly. And then as we get back to Unity in our settings, that's good. I was like forgetting where things are. And we go into our, no, that's not it. Aha. We go into the package manager, we go into settings. And what that command does effectively, and you can do this manually, which is all detailed on the Getting Started docs, is we add in a project scope for the Reality Collective. We don't actually need both of these because effectively they're all under the same library, so we can make it easier to access. And then in from there, we go back to our package manager, and we've got the service framework package, which is easily installable with all the versions in there. It has a dependency on another package, which we also include, which is the utilities package. Now more on that on another day, but effectively that gives you tons of extensions, utilities, a lot of async functionality, a lot of REST utilities for working with it. But that's not the scope. That's what we're not here for today. So with the service framework installed, we can go on and create our own service. So we have all our options here, and we're just going to create a new service. The service with itself walks through everything you need to be able to do to create your first service. So I'm going to decide where we're going to put it. I'm going to create a new folder called my settings service. Go into there, and I'm going to call it my. You can be a lot more inventive about what you want your call your services, of course. It's completely up to you. So we go and create our service, and what that's going to do is that's going to generate. Thank you, Unity, for switching to Visual Studio. 3 files in the folder of your choice. The interface that we mentioned, that we're going to populate, the service itself, and also a profile. If you notice that on the actual wizard, you do get a choice of whether you want to generate a profile or not. It's completely optional. You don't have to have one. But we'll make a start here. Thank you, yes. And here are an interface. Now, recall back, we want to be able to have 2 things. We want to have a property. So we want a max players. Thank you. Visual Studio helping me out there. And we want to create a function which is going to save our settings. And all this is doing is saying that anything that's a setting service, it's always going to have a max players option, and it's always going to have a function called save settings. You can have parameters, anything else in here. All it's simply doing is defining up front what your service is going to use to access it. Anything that's not in the interface is just hidden behind the service itself. It also gives you greater deal of control of how your service runs. So we've got a service. I'm going to copy that because whoops, I'm going to copy that because I'm going to make use of that in a second. We go back here, and what we'll do as well is we'll also set up our profile. Yes, thank you, Unity. And what we're doing in the profile effectively is we are going to create settings which are effectively, it's a serialized asset we're going to create in our scene. And this allows us to actually configure it within Unity itself without hard coding things in the actual code itself. This is a lot more flexible than trying to find things around and makes them accessible. Now, I'm also using a pattern here. Do it properly. There we are. Now, one thing you always find is that you always want to control access to these things. I could have just declared a public variable because this is a serialized aspect, it's not accessible. But a pattern I always do too is anything that's going to be visible in the editor, we use the serialize field mechanism to make sure that Unity is always going to serialize and save those properties. And also then creating a public accessor so that when we need things to access this, it can. But more on that later. You also notice the fact that we also have script logic, configure logic here, where it will automatically add this to my editor menu to be able to add the project as well. Now, the final piece of the puzzle then, go to the settings service itself. Yes, thank you, Unity. Now, we provide a lot of boilerplate inside the project to help you get going. Every service has access to all the events that Unity has to offer without the overhead of actually having Unity look after them because they're handled by the service framework. So in here, we have all the model behavior callbacks you can use. If you don't need them, not going to use them, as I'm not going today, you can just delete them. And then there's some other helpful information here. So a few things we want to be able to get into here is that we've got our max players value that we want to be able to get. And then on startup, effectively, we've got the configured value in our profile. So we're essentially going to grab that from the profile that's actually passed into the service on startup. Now you could simply cache the profile and then use the profile in excess as it's been accessed. This can lead to some other confusion if how you're using it. So our recommendation is that you always extract the settings you want out of the profile as you're going to use them. And then obviously we need to look at our service and we need to implement the interfaces that we've just defined. So in this case, I've got my max players value, which I can now point at my property that I've got there. So it's a read-only field. And then I've got to save settings. And when I save settings, effectively all I'm going to do is for this demonstration. What is this doing? That looks really good. Thank you. Thank you, Unity. I'm going to set a int of my setting. And I'm just going to store the max player value for whatever reason. I might want to actually then call that back up later. Again, this is just an extremely simple example. You more likely when you're saving out settings and things like that, you're likely going to serialize them and save them to a file or something else, not player prefs as a rule of thumb, or you might be uploading to a backend service. But this code is all safe and sound in the service itself. My project doesn't need to know. I simply say, go and save the settings, and then however I configure the service, that's what it's going to do. So long as everything's good, and we can go back to Unity. I should have handled all the warnings, and then so all the warnings are fine. Now, in consume, so that's my service set up, but obviously we need to then tell our project what is our service and where it is. And for this, we're going to add the service manager instance to the scene. As long as it's in the first rough scene, it doesn't have to be. It's completely up to you about when you want your services to be active. Our recommendation is it's always in the first scene and it'll continue on in the project. And then this gives us the configuration over here for what is the service framework. Now at its head, it needs its own configuration to be able to say, this is the profile for my service framework. Now this also gives added value that if there are different scenarios, we want different services up and running, you can change this profile so that when you then reinitialize the service framework, you can run under a different set of circumstances. But to be honest, in most projects that I've worked with, we have one. And then we configure the services to be active when we want it. So now we've got our service framework set up. We can add in our new service. And so long as the service you've generated is accessible in your project, you can access it via code. We can then go and browse, and it will actually simply show up in here to say, these are the services that I've got available. So I can select my service. We created a profile for it, so we can go and basically click add, and it will create a new setting for it. And for the purpose of this demonstration, I can say the max players is 3. So I'm not hard coded this the maximum players setting. I'm doing it design time in the editor itself, but it's in a single central location. I don't need to worry about which scene it was configured in or if it's been changed between scenes. It just makes life a lot easier. And then more importantly, and we said that the framework is platform aware. So I can choose under which platforms this service runs. And I can have the separate instances for how the service works and have it running for different platforms or different versions. Generally speaking, that's up to you about how you design your project and how you want it to work. But for simplest sake, I'm going to say everything. Now, the other thing to note as well is that this does exactly what you tell it to do. So if you tell it to only run on Android, it'll only run on Android and not in the editor. So you'll notice the fact there's an editor option here. So if you want to be able to debug in the editor, make sure you select the editor as well. Well, we fully detail that in all the options and configurations in the Getting Started guide. So there's my service. It's up and running, but now I need to access it. So for the purpose of this demonstration, I've created a very simple script down the bottom here. And it's called the Add Player Screens Handler. And all we got here, like I say, we've got the add button, the quit button, the count number here, and this little text field here. If we go into this, I always like to use my regions to be able to make my code nice and clean. So we'll collapse that part. So when this screen starts up, it's going to wire up all the buttons. It's going to make sure the max players are turned off. When it's disabled, it's going to turn off all the buttons. And then we've got the 2 buttons here now. So what we want to happen here is that we have a max player count. So obviously, if I run this right now, I'm going to be able to add as many players as I want, and nothing's going to stop me. I'm just going to keep adding play until infinity. But our game only supports 3 players, so that's not really going to help us. So with our settings service set up, what we can effectively do is get access to it. So I simply call a reference to it. So my settings, and I'm going to say service manager instance, because there is only one. And I'm going to get the service that I've registered by the interface that we created it for. So my setting service. So no matter where I am in my project, no matter which piece of code, there's a quick way to get access to the service that's actually registered with that framework. And for those more advanced people, if you wish, you can also, yes, you can register these services in code if you so wish. But we're doing things quick and simple here. So long as I've got access to my settings, we always make sure I have safe code. Then I'm going to make sure the fact that if my current player count is greater than or equal to my settings.max player count, then obviously there's no more players here. We can't have that. So I'm going to reset it back to my settings.max players, and I'm going to also then activate this max players reach warning to say, I'm sorry, you can't add any more players because I don't let you. I'm a meanie and I'm not going to let you in there at all. So that's all fine. So that basically means now that every time I click on the add players, I'm using the setting that I've configured from here. Again, very, very basic setting. A lot of the service I use are a lot more complex than this. So that fine control the players, but also when the player clicks on quit, we also want to go and actually make sure the fact that we have saved our settings. So we can get our reference to this here. Accessing the services again is very low latency, so you can do it this way if you wish. And then I'm going to call my save settings for what it's there. Now, realistically, what you're going to do, you'd probably have a single reference for this and get it when the game starts up. But I'll show you another handy little trick what we can do. So I'm getting two pieces of functionality. So I've got my function at my service here, and I've got my setting at the service here. So now if I go back to here and run my project, and it's just fantastic this. So I'm going to start adding, well, no, I can't add any more players as I'm stuck. But someone comes along 5 minutes later and says, by the way, I've updated it. We can actually support to 5 players now. Now, instead of going through the code and finding out especially which variable, which setting we're going to do, I just go back to my service framework. So I'm select my service manager instance or not. I'm going to go into the setting, and remember this max player setting. Right, I'm going to set that to 5 now. I don't know where the service is. I don't know where the code is. I've not had to change it. Well, there you go. I've quickly changed something about the service and the way that operates. And now I can support up to 5 players, just like that, making it nice and easy. And this adds an element of flexibility around how this service can be done, because given the fact that we want services to be reusable and shareable, a lot of the services I build for different clients and projects, I actually create an entire UPM package for just that service. The code is locked away. You can't edit it. It's safe. But I give you an element of flexibility to design and change how you want that service to work based upon the configuration. And you can change that how you wish, and so on and so forth. And obviously, if I click quit here, that's going to kill the editor and come back to the setting. So that gives you a view then how all these things interchange. So having the interface to say, this is what my service does, having all the code do what the service does, and then giving a configuration profile, which then you actually have a design time in a singular place, change how that service works, gives a lot of power and flexibility. But I've been talking about these things for all this time, and all these services there, but who's using this anyway? As it turns out, we have got quite a wide range of partners who are working with us, and also they're gonna use this framework to great extent in some of them. When I asked them for a quick roll call for what services they're running for this presentation, I was even quietly surprised about how much effort's gone into building out and what these projects have got. So we go through some of these. We've got Dynamite Studios, and they do a lot of work around leaderboards. They have a central service which basically runs all the authentication, the access and control of how they work the leaderboards. And then they actually create sub-services, these modules, for each and every different leaderboards. They've got global leaderboards, different regional ones, tips of the week, and those are all controlled separately apart from the service itself. So they have a nice layered approach for how these work, and we have a nice write-up of how this is sort of managed in the documentation. They're also running an avatar system where they can work with many different avatar providers. So this is the metaverse, as it were. People need to grab or download their avatars from wherever they need to. So one service, several providers, they're going to Ready Player Me or other avatar systems that are out there. And depending on who the user is and where they're coming from, they can simply connect to that and download that avatar, and it's running in their project. But critically is their project itself doesn't need to change. And if they add another avatar provider later on, they're simply adding another element to that service, and again, the project doesn't change. It gives a whole realm of opportunities and things that are there for what it can do. Other services, things like Code Effect. Now, they have an interesting one where they've actually got a video player service, and again, they use different providers based upon the different types of video and where it's coming from. So in some case, if it's nice, it's open, it's on the web, like YouTube, they'll use like the Unity Video Player plugin. For other services where it's harder to access or they need to be able to do compression and things, they have a separate AV Pro module plugged in. So it can do all the additional work that you wouldn't have to do, or you can't do in some cases with the Unity Video. But as far as their project's concerned, it's a singular solution. They're asked for video, they get video, it's presented in their scene. Makes life a lot simpler, he says, moving on. At X Reality Labs, they've used this to great extent with so many different ways and things that actually use to connect things, where from storage when they're downloading resources from Azure, from Sketchfab, from Google, And it's a case of, well, get the storage service and download me a file from this place, please. The project doesn't need to know where it's coming from. Say with networking, anchoring solutions, debugging support, and even working with some shared spaces and controls and asset management. So they simply say, right, well, I've downloaded this texture. Can you go and put it into my scene for me, please? All managed and packaged so that it can actually be easily reusable. Over at Ether, which is a premier XR experience platform, they're very big in the US at the moment of how they're delivering these things. And again, they keep amazing with what they want to use this for. So whether they're doing spatial tracking through Azure anchors or whether they're doing image tracking, they're having a whole addressable system. So extending Unity's addressable system and making it into much more compact and easily reusable thing, adding services like multiplayer and more asset management and notifications. And so they can work with multiple notification providers all from a single line of code. It doesn't matter. It's because whichever device you're on, the service is up and running for whatever notifications that platform supports. But again, behind that common interface, it's one call. It doesn't matter where it is. And Villicus, our good friends in Holland, a good friend over there. Oh, why is that not working? Oh, there we go. I needed to click, not move my arrow. You might recognize this guy. He's also been speaking at Global XR, Godot Joust. And he's also been blogging about a lot of the services he's been using and building, from QR code readers. But they gone even further than that. So they control all their user authentication through services. They do C understanding and, again, more anchoring and even connection with other Bluetooth devices and UDP connections. It truly is amazing what some of our partners and supporters are going through and building with these services, and they get the benefit of the fact that it's a hardened framework. They can trust it, and this has been used in production services, and it's truly powerful. So as you see, I mean, you too can join in and see what's going on with this. So where are we going now? As of today, now this is news for anyone who's seen this in the past. We just reached our first milestone of release 1. Now, it might sound odd for something that's been going around for years, but it's a case of we've reached the level of confidence that we have where this is rock solid. We haven't had a single issue on the framework in months. There's been little tweaks and developments and enhancements, and making sure that all of our documentation, which is hard for a smaller group to manage, is all up to date and is ready for anyone to actually start using. You simply go to the Reality Collective and you can download it now, or just a OPM, you can download it now and get up and running and get going. If you want to see this roadmap, you can go to the Reality Collective Project 1, which is for the service framework. Expect to see more of that in the future. But from a roadmap perspective, we're not sticking to any, we don't have any specific timescales or deadlines we're going to do. Things will be added as on demand of when people ask for them, when they need them. Some of the things we'd like to improve in the future is more enhanced dependency injection support. So where we have services that can depend on each other, we want the framework to be able to manage it for us, rather than manual, what order service can start up, how they can quickly call into each other, share events for how they work, and a lot more advanced techniques beyond just the basic service. Some of the most asked things are some little more edit support. So Yoast added a great feature which, with a single game object, you can inspect and see in the editor exactly what a service is doing, what all its settings are, how it all works, what's going on. But it's read-only. So one thing we like to do is be able to edit that. We're also having some more design time kind of things. So colors to highlight whether a service is operating fully or not, or there's some configuration error, and let you know of ahead of time by hitting play or building it whether you're going to have a problem. So we welcome you to join us on this lovely journey. Lots of links on page for you to go over. And effectively, it's a very hardened, fast-paced project which allows you to do the smallest things to get you running quickly and to simply separate and make your code more maintainable for your project, to the more advanced. And one of the things I think we're talking about and trying to work out is that I want to work out some kind of published library. So we'll even have off-the-shelf services that you can pick up and use rather than just building your own, because not everyone needs, well, a setting service is generally particular to an actual project, but you might want services that work with spatial persistence as your anchors, image tracking, and so on, or whether you want services that work with different types of networking and having a more generic interface rather than have to keep rebuilding networking each and every time. But we're open to suggestions for anything anyone wants, and if there's enough demand, we will publish that service or even provide capabilities for people to publish their own. So that's it. I think we can open the floor to questions, Diana, and see what is out there.
Thank you so much, Simon. That was an amazing presentation. Also, learning here beside you. This is such a great opportunity for all of us to learn from each other. I, of course, never heard about this type of functionality tool that you're bringing to developers. This is amazing. Thank you so much. One of the questions would be, could you share one particular example? I mean, of course, you showcase already some companies using the framework, but one particular example that you really love of a project using this that uses maybe more of the capabilities of the service framework?
I think one of the most fun things is, ironically, it sounds boring, it's storage. Because the amount of projects I work with, especially in XR, we want to be able to dynamically load content, but we don't have to keep writing separate lines of code for talking to Azure and then authenticating to Azure. Separate lines of code for going to talk to Sketchfab or, well, Google Poly when it was around, but that's kind of gone now. That's one of the services that I use almost every single project I have. And it's a case of, because I've built it once, I simply have to basically configure it to say, right, these are the authentication parameters for these different services. I just pick it up and just drop it in. And every project I go to now is like, oh, download file from Azure, this path, go and get it for me, please. And then through the utilities and the back end, the file is instantly downloaded to your machine and it works 100% of the time. I never have to worry about, is the authentication bad or something like this. And it in some ways, it's the simplest things which provide the most reuse. Another one, so like an asset management system. So once a file's been downloaded, I want you to put it into the scene for me, please. While it's downloading, I want you to put a placeholder or an object in the scene so users can see something's downloading. And again, this is all things that happen automatically. I don't even have to write a line of code in my actual client project for it to work. It's a case of, well, go download this file and see a nice little placeholder. Once it comes in, it gets processed and then it's into my scene and running. And if I want to add a new file type or new something else, I don't have to go and write all this different logic. I'm like, okay, fine, we'll just add this one extra little feature and I've got another file all coming in, especially when it's JSON. Having just a way to say, just deserialize it and then, yeah, it's offloaded, it's done.
Yeah, amazing. It seems that it really helps with making the process more efficient, optimization, etc. There are many multiple capabilities. I'm inviting everyone to check realitycollective.io and to get in touch with Simon. And by the way, Simon, do you have any way that people can reach out to you, LinkedIn or something like that? Or how do you prefer if someone has further questions?
Oh, if you want to reach out to me personally, then basically I'm Simon Darkside J, wherever you want to find me. See, I think I put that right at the beginning.
Awesome.
There we go.
Yeah.
That's me. Anywhere and everywhere, that is me. Whether I'm blogging, whether I'm vlogging, vlogging. There's lots of logging things these days. Oh, whether I'm logging, in fact.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much. So Simon Darkside J, anybody can reach out to him through that media. And of course, we're going to continue inviting you for other speaking events because the work that you're doing is absolutely great and more people should know about it. Is there anything else that you'd like to add right now, Simon?
People just dig in, get started. We always talk about what kind of service could go. We have a Discord, which if you go to the Reality Collective, we've got a Discord there as well for chatting, and we're always there to answer questions or offer ideas or provide support. Advance notice if we're going to break anything, which has only happened once. And I was forgiven for it almost instantly, thankfully. You're welcome, Yas. And basically get out there, get using it, because whether it's a simple service, something that you reuse throughout your entire project, and you just wanted to make sure that it's performant, working, and reusable, just build a service for it. If you want something more advanced and you want to be able to have different ways for that service to work, then we provide all the capability to do for it, and we're always there to help.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. Amazing presentation, Simon. I really can't wait to put my hands on that. I'm going to head over to Reality Collective and share that in as many people as I can, because we are also part of a community of developers and they are going to be loving to know about your work. Thank you so much, and see you in the next session. Bye for now.
Goodbye, everyone, and see you out there.